English with deck. So when people mention about England or Britishness, there are definitely some stereotypical thoughts that come to mind, or things that just sit perfectly with the idea of Britishness. Now, some of those are accurate, some of those are not so accurate. The same with every culture. When people think of Japanese culture, there are some things which are stereotypically accurate, stereotypically rude, stereotypically non accurate. It's the same for every culture. Now, I just wanted to cover today a couple of things which people often get confused with or associate with Britishness, and just clear the air on a few of those. Now, some of these are pretty universal, but can come across as a little bit rude or indifferent to the untrained eye. Anyway, if you ever encounter these, maybe you would feel a little bit awkward, or maybe feel like you offended someone, or maybe a little bit uncomfortable. But hey, if you're in the know, you can probably avoid those feelings. So this one is pretty universal. I would say different cultures have different unspoken rules around this. However, it's definitely a universal trait. Now that is queuing. Now, a lot of people do say that British people love to queue. I guess so. Yeah, I think we queue instinctively. It's polite. It shows organizedness, readiness. You know, I'd say queuing is kind of more acceptable. I would say if there is a queue to the place or establishment you're going to, if there is a queue, you join it. If there isn't a queue, and then one could appear quickly or momentarily. So you need to think: is this a appropriate place to wait for a queue? And now, one thing which is quite common is that people generally won't say speak to other people in the queue other than small talk. Now, small talk is a whole different topic. We can cover that another time. But yeah, if there's a queue, join it, kind of thing. Now, one thing which is a serious social crime would be cutting in line. Again, universally, I would say this is probably disliked for obvious reasons. Now, you might get someone saying, "Oi, get to the back of the line! Oi, you cut in front of us!" Arr." However, I think most people would probably just ignore it. They probably won't confront you, but you'll get a classic sigh, and they'll remember you forever as that awful person who cut in front of them. However, I really recommend not doing this, whatever culture you're in. It's not fun for anyone involved. Um, yeah, so if you're unsure about where to queue, where to wait, just ask, "Sorry, are you in the queue?" And then that will immediately clarify whether there is a queue, where you should stand, and how long you would probably be waiting for. Okay, now this one I think is quite an important one. Friendliness and social space. Now this is a real tricky one, definitely person by person rule. But socially, I would say people would be more likely to have a little chat on public transport. Of course, you don't want to be like rah 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 rah. But at a reasonably polite level, having a little chit chat is not so socially unacceptable. It is not. Definitely not shouting in someone's ear, though. I think, yeah, and holding the door for people. Again, these are just very standard, universal social norms, I would say. However, one thing I did want to talk about here is, for example, if you meet someone, now maybe the first time, maybe the umpteenth time. But things like a handshake, very normal. Again, people, person by person, might be have a different opinion on this. However, a handshake, absolutely fine. A hug, depends on the person. Maybe if you're more acquainted with that person, they would be okay with that. Kissing on the cheek, as some cultures do, or probably not okay. And then, for example, like a touch on the arm, maybe a grabbing someone by the shoulder, just a hey, how are you doing? Again, it really depends on how comfortable you are with that person. But yeah, do get used to the handshake, the classic handshake, very important for a lot of people. Okay, now this one, number 3, I think it can confuse a lot of people. However, again, lots of cultures do have it in their own way, shape, or form. But indirect refusals, yeah, maybe, probably means no. I think it comes to the classic British way of politely saying no. In so much so that quite often you won't hear no, but you might hear maybe. Which one are you having? Kind of thing. Oh, I don't. I'm a little bit full. Again, people will see and hear these in their own culture countless times, but obviously when it's not your first language, it can be a bit confusing. So quite often, now you hear this from kids a lot, but it's true in many ways. Maybe quite often means no. Not always, but often. Definitely not always, but enough to cause emotional confusion. So if it stays vague forever, then yeah, you've probably got your answer. I heard once that it's not about being dishonest, it's about avoiding awkwardness. And quite often that creates awkwardness later, but you get used to it. So, just a quick wrap up. Queuing. Very important. Don't cut the line, of course, and remember to ask, where is the queue? About the personal space, no need to tap someone on the arm, but be prepared for a good handshake. And maybe, well, you probably have got a no there, but definitely double check on that one.